Joanne Wilson, and this is Positively Gotham Gal. Real, honest, and meaningful conversations with women entrepreneurs about their approach to life, business, and everything in between.
So happy to do this with you, Fanny.
Thank you so much.
So, food has obviously been a huge part of your life. I mean, you grew up in Mexico, you have Jewish background, of course, and we all know that, the Jews love to eat. Everything is around what's the next meal, and then you went to culinary school. So, what made you I want to go to culinary school? And that's a big leap.
Yeah, it's funny because when I was in high school thinking about, what career or path I was going to take, food was not even on my radar because things were very different back then, I graduated high school in 94, and I didn't know, first of all, I didn't know any female chefs. That wasn't a thing. There was no like food programming, or there was no Netflix. There were no, like peers to look up to. So it wasn't even in my radar. So I was always very creative. And I knew I wanted to do something in the arts. My mother had an antique shop. And so we were always exposed to art since we were little, and I just loved it. But it wasn't so I applied to different art schools. And when I found out about cooking and I told my parents, I was like, "Oh my God, I found out there's cooking school." I wanted to go.
Who knew?
Who knew? And they were like, "No." And I said, "Well, what do you mean no?" But the funny thing is that they actually wanted me to pursue art. So it wasn't like, let's go do something practical. No. And I was like, what? This is the only art that you uses your five senses. And I had taken in my high school, there was an option to take French, or the year divided into cooking, ceramics, and photography. And to me, it was the choice.
Yeah, I mean, that's like, well, what are you going to do? Of course, you're going to do the latter.
Right?
Exactly.
But actually, very few people chose that. And I always had physics after my cooking class. And I always wanted to make something extra. And the joy, there was something very magical and special about making something. And of course, it was like mostly guys. And I always had a lot of guy friends in high school. So it was just this something that brought me joy to make, but also, to share it was a big part of it. So that's kind of how it started. So my parents said, why don't you go to school here in Mexico for 2 years, and then if you still want to do it, then go ahead. But they thought I was just gonna have get it out of my system. Little did they.
Right. But little did they know, then you went on, and you went on to work with you know, in great places and kitchens around the world. How many talk about that? I mean, as a female
Yeah.
at that time, were you like one of the only women in the kitchen?
Yes, and actually, even though I knew I wanted to kind of specialize in pastry at the time, I felt I needed to start in the savory side to kind of prove myself, because most of the women that I found in kitchens were doing pastry or sweet.
Yeah, they were. And is that still true today? I mean, I get it. You can come in, make your pastry, and like out you go.
No, no, actually, a lot of the most recognized and amazing pastry chefs are actually men, and vice versa. So I think it's still evolving. I mean, you see many more women in the kitchen now, and maybe there'll be a time when people, instead of asking like what's it like to be a female chef, they will just ask, what's it like to be a chef.
Exactly. Yes, yes. That's what we look forward to, 100%.
For sure.
So talk about the restaurants you were in and what that was like, and what'd you do in them when
Yeah.
I assume you were in the back of house.
Yeah, I was in the back of house, and for me, it was a very sort of different trajectory than a lot of people, because I had to find places that would sponsor my visa. Being from Mexico, that's sort of an added hurdle. Not being from here, and it's not a career where It's very common to get visas or be sponsored by. It's changed because
Mm-hmm.
the industry itself has changed. So I'd had to be like, hey, I have no experience. I'm applying for this job, and by the
And
way,
can I get a visa
and
too?
then
Yeah.
yes, it was like there was one little thing I'd forget to mention. Can I sponsor? And I said I'll find a way to pay for it. I'll get the lawyers. But so it was very difficult to establish sort of mentorships, but and stay at these places that I really wanted to. But I worked at 11 Madison Park when it first started out, when it was owned by Danny Meyer.
Mm-hmm.
And I did my externship at this amazing Michelin star restaurant called Aquelarre in San Sebastian. And
Mm-hmm.
that was, it was an unpaid internship where we worked both. I mean, it was like 18 hours a day. We only had
I'm
one day
sure.
off, but it was the best experience of my life. I wouldn't trade it for the world. It was incredible. And so I just I was like, I was just grateful to get any job that I could and try to squeeze as much out of it as I could. Yeah.
And San Sebastian is so beautiful.
Oh my God, it's incredible. It's
It is incredible. Yeah.
incredible.
But you must have been through those experiences, been bit by this entrepreneurial bug, because eventually you went on in 2010 and launched, La Newyorkina. So,
Yeah.
what was it that, was it having a family? Was it about, I want to do my own thing. I don't want to work in a restaurant. Like, what was it that created that, which is still here today?
Yeah, so I think, because I was sponsored by visas, and so long, I owe it, it's a very weird feeling. I personally felt like I was almost like somebody owned me, like even if I loved the job and I wanted to get something, wanted another job, or to learn more things, I couldn't. If I didn't like the job, I was trapped, and so I just felt very kind of confined. And I wanted to become an entrepreneur to have creative freedom, whatever that meant. It wasn't because I'm still not sort of, I've learned to be, I always say, like, I became an entrepreneur by default because it was always led by creativity, not by sort of a business mindset or anything like that. And then in 2009, I spent a year traveling around Mexico doing research for my first cookbook called My Sweet Mexico. And when I came
Hmm.
to New York, I wanted to start my own business because that experience really changed my life, even though I didn't realize it at the time in many ways. Like, I felt I had this mission to devote at least an important part of my life to sharing the sweetness of Mexico. And so I would call my dad and I said, so I have this idea. This is what, and by then I had my green card.
Hmm.
And so I said, I want to do this. I want to do this. I want to have open this store or that store. And one day he got really upset, and his approval has always been very important to me. And he said, you keep saying the same concept, the same idea. You're just changing this confection for this other confection. Like, do whatever you want. And then one day I literally had a dream, like literally, that, and I woke up from it, and I was like, I'm gonna open a Mexican ice cream shop in New York. That's what I'm. And so I called him up and I was like, this time it doesn't matter what you say. I know this is the right thing. Of course, I still wanted his approval.
Of course.
And quiet for about a minute. I'm like, so what do you think? And he said, you're going to have to figure out what to do in the winter, but this is a great idea because I think ice cream is a very noble way to introduce people to the flavors of another place. Every culture has their ice creams or frozen treats, and so I had two jobs at the time, and I rented a kitchen, that a bakery at night, and a friend of mine, Hannah, helped me out that summer, and I said I'm gonna start with paletas, Mexican style ice pops instead of ice cream because I thought it's less expensive, the machinery, and I can test it out for a summer and see how it goes, how people like the flavors of Mexico. So she would get into the kitchen once they closed their business, and then I would arrive around midnight to literally put sticks inside the popsicles. I didn't have a machine or anything. And then I would have to, and if they weren't ready, I had to just sit and wait for the freeze, for them to be ready for me to put it, and then have to wait again to see if they were ready to unmold. So I spent a lot of, and then I would have to get up and go to my job. So I often like literally went straight from there.
Oh my God. So you basically didn't sleep as you started your business, which most people don't.
Exactly. And then I was like, this is not sustainable. I mean, I have to figure out a way. So I created these aluminum lids. I would fold aluminum to get sort of pressed against the mold and try to get them in there. I mean, it was crazy. And then we signed up. We heard about this new fair that was opening up called the Hester Street Fair. We
Hmm.
applied, and I applied, and had never made a popsicle in my life, because in Mexico, you don't really grow up making popsicles the way that I found it later that a lot of people do in the States, because we have great paleterias, great shops that make them. So it's sort of, you don't, it's not a thing, or what.
Right.
And so
But it was your way of taking this Mexican flavors to everyone through a bar.
exactly, exactly. And I wanted to test it out, and I made 5 flavors. And I thought, if I make strawberry, people like strawberry, but really I wanted to give them an experience and test that out. So we made mango chili, avocado, hibiscus, coconut, and I think it was passion fruit. And I was like, and it's very colorful. And I said, okay. And so the first day we were starting out, we rented out um, a parking lot, like a space to put our ice cream cart inside the parking lot in the Lower East Side. We had to push it like about 8 to 10 blocks. It was really heavy. And then we would fill it and go to the market. So the first day we were filling it out, like La Newyorkina is launching, Hester Street Market is launching, and with the lid of the cart, it I actually fractured my nose. So
Oh my
so
God.
I was like, I opened I knocked on the door. Hannah was like filling the stuff, and she just sees blood coming out from everywhere. She's like, "What's wrong?" I'm like, "Don't worry about it. Just fill the cart. We gotta get there." So it's always since day one, it has not been a smooth ride.
Wow, wow. Well, hopefully it's getting smoother. So,
Yeah.
what was there a challenge? I mean, New York City is so open to new things, and it's certainly today. I mean, everything is coming from a different location in regards to, what's food here. It's just like it's a mixture of so many different cultures. Did you find there was a challenge, for people to say an avocado popsicle?
I think, one of the great things about New York is exactly the openness, right? Like that's
Hmm.
what they're looking for. They're looking for something that's authentic. And when I say authentic, I mean like where whoever is making it, it's authentic to them. Like it's sincere. And I think people are always looking for experiences. So there was a lot of there were there was definitely curiosity. We had like the salted chili from day one on top of the cart to put on a popsicle, and a lot of people had never thought about like chili and fruit. But for the most part, I think people were curious and excited. But and ex- but I thought, well, is this something like, oh, you're gonna try once, and then that's sort of the experience, or are they gonna come back for it? But
Right.
luckily, to my surprise, they loved it. and and
And
so
did you at one point have a store in Park Slope? And also you did the High Line.
yeah, and so so by the end of that year, I had quit my both of my jobs.
Thank God.
um
Mhm.
and but then I was like, oh, what's next? And a former boss, that then became a friend, asked me what I was gonna do, and what I was gonna do next. And I said, well, I have to figure out how to grow the popsicles because they really like them. He's like, okay, but now it's the fall.
So basically, you've got this. So all of a sudden, it's winter and you're working on donuts, and you open this store that has the most insane donuts ever, in like literally the outskirts of Clinton Hill. And it just takes off.
Yeah, and we started out making donuts out of a French fryer. which is crazy for anyone that makes donuts, but it's a very tiny thing. And we literally just opened the door. I mean, I tested that recipe for the dough for many months, and that's where the name came from. It was all just about the dough. We wanted to make sure a donut was amazing, even as we say. And then
Great
but I
name
wanted to
too.
bring, and I remember, of course, and so we focused on that, and my partner Thierry and I talked a lot about sort of what we were looking for, because we didn't grow up with donuts per se. I mean, of course we'd had them, but they weren't a part of either of our cultures, and it wasn't something that we were trying to replicate, or, oh, remember that particular spot. It was more like, okay, well, why aren't there more donut shops um, that we felt, were making them in sort of like an artisanal way, before artisanal was like used word. And so we said we've
Hmm.
sort of geeked out a lot about the texture and the flavor, but again, it's something that exists, and in our minds, it wasn't, something that we were trying to replicate. And one day, after several months and several kilos later, I called him up and I said, I think I got it. I think I have it. But he tasted it, and I was like, maybe what I'm thinking is not what he's thinking, right? And so he tasted it, and he's like, all right, we're opening in 2 weeks. And then I said, okay. So we had a lot of stuff to figure out. Then I started focusing on the glazes, and of course we were gonna have like the traditional flavors, but I always wanted to have sort of like my a little spin. So I brought sort of my pastry experience to do things, with just a little bit different. And then I remember one day feeling, you know, they're also brown because it's the time of year. There's not a lot of fruit. The fruit there is kind of brownish. And I was craving agua de
Hmm.
Jamaica, hibiscus water. So I went to get some hibiscus flowers at a deli nearby, Mexican deli
Hmm.
nearby. And as I was sitting there, I was like, huh, this would make a interesting glaze. So I made a glaze with hibiscus, and that became one of the most sort of iconic flavors from dough when
Right.
I was there.
Well, it goes from your Mexican heritage.
Yeah, and so a lot of the flavors ended up being sort of very Latin inspired, the dulce de leche, passion fruit, and we had the cafe au lait. That was like his Frenchness, he wanted to call that. But literally, we opened the door one day, and just sort of word started spreading, and then there was, like, I think it was the Brooklyn Flea that opened, and that was, when a lot of people started to really know about us. And
And also really start experiencing the flea was at the right time at the right place. I mean, people were just creating all these incredible foods, and it was just like an incredible, delicious experience going to the flea and tasting all of these foods from different cultures and that people were creating. I mean, it was really pretty amazing.
yeah, it was great to be part of that sort of energy. And I still, to this day, some of my closest friends are people that I met, back then. And actually, so then later, I mean, because they've had opposite high seasons, it actually has kind of worked in my favor. Uh, Not a lot of sort of downtime, but I'm a workaholic, so
Hmm.
so that's fine. But then when I applied to the Highline, I said, well, I needed to find a new kitchen that wasn't sustainable, and I ended up being like in a shared kitchen space, where a lot of these small businesses that also, and a lot of them sold at the Brooklyn Flea, were at. And then it's sort of, New York has a lot of
Hmm.
very strange and strict sort of rules, and there's actually no permit to be a street vendor. Which I mean, they're trying to change that, but since the very beginning, it's sort of like they capped it years ago. Even in the pandemic, they didn't lift that, which was crazy.
Yes. I mean, the rules and regs are sometimes you're like, wow, that's a real, that, okay, I get it. And other times you're like, why?
Exactly. And I'm like, I can't sell popsicles to you know, like at the park where people want it. Again. But that's just, it is how it is. So you have to navigate.
You have to navigate. Exactly. So eventually you went out, someone came knocking on your door, you got funding for dough.
Right. So
Right.
pretty much like that following year, we started getting requests from all over the world, not just in the States. Like we went open, in Paris and London and Australia, and we're like, what? We're like this. What are you talking about? And so we felt, enough people were asking. We're like, maybe we do need to open, but let's open in New York. Like let's not. And we felt we're gonna miss the boat. And there were a lot of different people that approached us. And then there was, someone that sort of we felt that at the time, like, we had no experience, right? Well, my partner had experience with partnerships. I never did, and I didn't want to get involved in the conversations. I didn't, I was
No,
just,
you were the food person. You were the chef. You were the creator. You're
yeah.
a creative person.
And they actually negotiated for like a year before we signed to open in Manhattan. And it was very clear once we partnered up, and we were starting to build out our space in the Flatiron, and we ran out of money. And so, but we can't get into details really, but it was sort of like the first sign when we started to have those conversations that this wasn't going to work. uh,
Right.
and
That those were not the right partners.
they were not the right partners, and it took many years. Despite that, still like, you know working 70, 80, sometimes 90-hour weeks, this, because it was like, well, this is a bigger thing, and putting stuff aside. And my dad told me many times, like, make sure you read the agreement and you have a good lawyer. And
100%. I remember talking to you at that time.
yeah, that we actually, my partner was the one who suggested the lawyer, right? So it was one lawyer that was supposed to draft this agreement that, it's like, take what verbally we agreed on and put it into paper. And, at the end of the day, we were stuck because of our own fault. Like, we signed an agreement we should have never signed.
Yeah, that's really what it came down to,
That's really what it
100%.
came down to.
Yeah,
And
and it's hard to get out of those things.
and it was very difficult to get out. I was miserable, like, for many years, and it took almost 3 years to be able to find an agreement. And we sold our shares, and they kept the name, and they've grown. And I wish them luck. I don't want any conflict. I don't want, I just want to be able to create and move on.
Yes, I get it. Yeah, I mean, it was a bad thing, and you've moved on, and you were still drawn to the donuts.
I was still drawn to the donut.
And so you opened Fan Fan.
So yeah, my original partner, who I opened dough with, and we said we want to open, and we had a space that was built out. Like, we ended up, like, we signed our separation like February, right before the shutdown.
Mm-hmm.
But we had a space that we had been building out in the Navy Yard that was like
Mm-hmm.
90% ready, you know. But then with the shutdown, and then the original space from Doe, we had that, like, that was never part of that was always separate.
Mm-hmm.
And we were gonna do a wholesale bakery out of there. It was gonna be called Bernard's. We had this whole thing, so we gutted the whole place. And then when everything shut down, and we started to, after a few months, and we're like, all right, this is not like a couple weeks, a couple months. This is like, we don't know. We couldn't keep both places, so we decided to let go of the new space, even though it was, because it was also, the whole idea was very community based, going back to the roots of things that are important to me and to us. And had like sort of living room kind of areas, and very large, sort of all the things you couldn't really do in during the pandemic. And I said, you know what, let's go back to the roots. Like, let's go back to where we started. We have the original spot, so what if it's raw? And we kind of started up again, in a very, not with a French fry fryer. That was a difference. We
That
had
was
an
a difference. Okay.
actual donut fryer, but with all the knowledge. And there's a lot of restrictions of things that we can and cannot do in terms of like size and flavors. And but it's okay. I didn't realize all this pent up creativity that I had inside. I didn't, because so much of my energy was just spent on other things. And so we ended up opening Fan Fan in the middle of the pandemic that October. And I get to do something that I love, that's creative, that has a lot of purpose behind, whether it's like who I source my ingredients from, or the story that I'm trying to tell, or the inspiration that I have, different things like that, right? But at the end of the day, it's something I get to do that makes people happy.
And makes you happy.
It makes me happy. So even though
Mhm.
there's all these layers, but to do that in the middle of the pandemic was particularly meaningful. And then a few months later, I had the first chocolate donut festival at Fan Fan. And
Mhm.
as a theme, I did around the world, because I felt I was really homesick. And I felt like many people can't go home, and also, or are longing to travel or just to bring joy. So I created 18 flavors inspired by countries from around the world. And it was so beautiful, like for people to come for 3 days and they would order, I'll have, the Iran and the Israel and South Africa and Brazil,
Mhm.
Japan. And it was so beautiful. It was just it's a very small thing, but that was so meaningful.
I'm sure, and for everyone who came in and did it.
Yeah, and I remember right when we opened, I love kids, and I love teaching kids. And so anytime I would see a kid, I'd be like, can I show them, how we make in the back, like. But especially in the beginning, there's a lot of people that were very hesitant to even come in and whatnot. And I remember this one mother, she was with her daughter, and I was like, is it okay, can I just show her, like how we make the donuts? It's a very small store. And she was like, yeah. And she just started like bawling. And then I started bawling. We were both just crying nonstop. And she was like, you don't know what this means. It's sort of like, this is the most joy she's had in, I don't even know how long, because they've been like cooped up. And
Yes, I mean, we've done so bad by our children in this whole thing. I mean,
yeah,
truly, we should be focused more on the children than we
yeah.
should have been focused on, elderly people that were, you know, not well or not healthy. I mean, I don't know why we do that as a nation. It's quite unfortunate. So, you know, now you have Fan Fan. I don't know
Yeah.
what your long-term plans are to grow that into something larger than one place, and what you're doing. But what's interesting is your husband is also in food. And
Yeah.
so, he's the owner of Casa Public. What do you say, Publica?
Casa Publica. He's one of the partners there. And then we work together at La Newyorkina, and then he actually
Hmm.
runs operations. So he's the best.
That's awesome. I mean, and you've got kids.
Yeah, we have a son who's almost 4, and that's my biggest motivations. That's the most delicious thing I've ever
Of
made.
course. And what is it like, having two people, entrepreneurial people in food with their own businesses and parents? Like, how are you managing work-life balance?
Well, I think one of the hardest things is sort of the instability that being an entrepreneur comes, especially like of a small business, and at a time like a pandemic.
Hmm.
So I think that's sort of one of the most challenging things, right? Like my dad keeps telling us, you need to buy a house, you need to buy an apartment, and I'm
And
like,
and what does your father do?
my father studied anthropology.
Oh,
Uh,
interesting.
and he used to write for different newspapers in Mexico. That's like who he was, but really he worked at a family business. They had a textile factory and a
Ah,
few properties.
right. So he's a business person.
So he's a business person,
Right.
but he sort of fell into it, and he was much better at than he thought he
He
he was.
would be.
He
Right.
never wanted to do that.
Right.
He's an intellectual, and so it's that. I think that's the most challenging part. But I think we try to set. I mean, he's very young, but good examples, and I mean, it has its good and its bad. I mean, when he was younger, we would take him to the kitchen, and we had a little crib like right there, and then you know, and so he's grown up, surrounded by food.
Be very interesting to see what he does.
Yeah, so to a lot of events, like I had him, like wrapped in like a rebozo at different events. So it'd be interesting to see his take on it. But it's hard, I think for me the hardest part in a personal level of the pandemic was time away from him, because in order to keep the lights on in the business, it required much more time away from him. And the logistical, things of like, we wanted to make sure everybody was safe first and foremost. So nobody was using the subway. So we would take him to the nanny's house, was all the way on the other side. We would go to Brooklyn. And then also my husband has hemophilia and Crohn's.
Oof.
So we're like, we didn't have a choice when the shutdown, right? Like I had closed, I didn't have dough anymore, and he had Casa Publica, but he was a partner, but was like, this, we need to make La Newyorkina work, whatever that means. And so we closed for about a week, and then we started making tamales to feed to people in the communities, because we felt like that's just my MO, to keep
Yeah,
going,
you just had to
right?
do something, right?
Have to do
Yes.
something, try to get donations, and then we partnered up with the Jewish Food Society and an organization called Feed the Frontlines. So we were able to rehire people for several months, and then we started thinking about what are we going to do if there's no season? I mean, already having a seasonal business is a challenge in New York
Yes.
because everything is so expensive. But we said, what if we don't have? So in anticipation of that, we started doing Mexican homestyle meals to deliver to people's homes. But then on top of that, we had to be, he was delivering a lot of these meals. And remember, in the beginning, they were even saying like no masks, right? So
Yeah,
he's
I mean,
delivering.
we've been through so many different things through this whole thing.
Yeah, and so we're like, well, I don't care what they say. You're wearing a mask because we want to make sure you're protected. So it was just very, very intense. Sorry, I deviated from the question, but
No, no, that's okay. This pandemic, particularly in the hospitality industry, the food industry, so many people who basically said, we're closed. I'm going home. I'm going to start baking and I'm going to do what I do and start delivering to the local neighborhoods, which
yeah,
is so good, because I do think that in this post, sort of as we're getting out of the phase of masks and the pandemic, is that there's a lot of ties to the community, and that's going to be more and more important, as it should be and should have been.
yeah,
But
I
I think
completely
that
agree.
that's going to be a really important part of where we go in regards to food and stores and everything else. You can even see in a lot of the neighborhoods, the stores that are now opening are really geared towards the neighborhoods they're in.
Yeah, and I feel this sort of goes back to that sense of community that drives a lot of us, and I hope that stays. People
I do
connect
too.
to. It's not just this food. It's like I remember we started doing this newsletter because we would have to do every week. We would change the menu because we had to, like we felt that was important, and to keep people excited and try to bring
I agree with that.
living,
Yes.
and it was very personal, and it was very raw, and I was like, this sucks, or this is
Yeah,
or
yeah.
this is what we're doing, or these are the mistakes, or this is, so and honestly, I think that because for so long I had dealt with the issue with the partnership, that
Yeah, that was a lot.
when this came, even though it was full of uncertainty and a lot of scary moments, it was different. I felt a weight that I didn't have before. And so I had this, it was weird, kind of like a clarity when there was no clarity, even though I didn't
Well,
know.
you owned it. It was yours. And you didn't have to report to someone who you shouldn't have been reporting to.
Yes.
That made no sense. I assume you have seen the documentary The Donut King.
Yes, yes, I have.
It's so good.
Yes, I have. It's fantastic. I highly recommend it. Yeah.
Highly recommended too. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I mean, your donuts are out of this world.
Thank you
And
so
by the
much.
way, the popsicles are amazing too. And so it'll be very interesting to see what you do next, but do not take any bad investors until you talk to me.
No, no, no. Yeah, and I just want to say like sort of one last thing is we ended up closing our brick and mortar for La Newyorkina, which was,
Hmm.
which was awful. So closing and opening a business within that same year was crazy, but the whole thing was just like I said before, to keep the lights on, and we're just so excited to be back in a place where we can think of growth and just so full of gratitude, to be honest. Like that's it. We're just full of gratitude to everyone, the community, to everyone that supported us, and to you, to everyone and anyone that has been so just incredibly warm and supportive, and I'm just excited for the next chapter, whatever that is,
Whatever that is. Well, I'm sure there will be a next chapter. And but also you are such a good, authentic human being, and
Thank
like a lot of people would have just walked away, not gotten back into this business, particularly not got back into the same food that you left. I mean, that is impressive. You continue like a little Energizer bunny. So I'm excited to watch afar to see what you do next.
Thank you so much.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on.
Thank you for
All
having me.
right. All right. Take
Bye.
care. All right. Bye
Bye.
bye.